I thought dreams were for the wealthy. I thought they were for the rich. I thought they were for the privileged. I didn't realize that you could dream. Dreams are free. That was like the light bulb moment. And before I knew it, I was flying on the Prime Minister's planes. And then I went, now I'm compromising my integrity. And I couldn't do that. The moment you compromise your integrity, you can't sleep.
From youth detention to the global stage, Jeremy Donovan is a proud Kuku Yalanji man, best-selling speaker, artist and cultural healer. He opened the Sydney Olympics, performed at Buckingham Palace not once but twice, and has addressed the United Nations. Through story, song, art and spirit, he's not just speaking, he's reshaping the soul of a nation.
The thing with culture is, even if you're not that interested in it, if I can narrate it, you'll fall in love with the words that I share, and that will impact you. I was the life of the party, but I was dying inside. I was unhappy in my marriage. I wasn't happy about how I was being a father. I wasn't happy with who I was. I wasn't happy with the story I told. Healing doesn't mean the scars don't exist. It just means the scars no longer control it.
Quick favour, over 60% of you that are regularly watching this podcast and enjoying it haven't yet subscribed. You know how this game works. If you could subscribe, like and follow on whatever your favourite platform is, I'd really appreciate it. Your support helps me more than you ever know. I'm able to get more interesting guests that are able to add more value and help transform your life. So thank you so much for supporting and being part of the game.
My name is Jeremy Donovan. When I was born, my mum named me Jeremiah, but the foster care system changed my name to Jeremy. And when I met my mum at 25, she called me Jeremiah. And I was like, Mum, my name's Jeremy. And she's like, no. So there were two things that came to light. One, I'd celebrated my birthday on the 1st of July every year. And so I was super excited in 2005 because my second son was born on the 1st of July. And I took both my two sons to meet my mum. It was the second time I was meeting her. And I said, it's great. Like, I've got Batari's born on the same day as me on the 1st of July. And she's like, no, you're born on the 3rd. I'm like, what do you mean? And my mum then gave me the tiny little bracelet that she had kept, which said Jeremiah, 3rd of July. And so it's this complex situation that the world already knew me. Like, at that stage, I'd already had passports. I was traveling for the Australian government. I was known as Jeremy Donovan. And so I changed my name by default to Jeremiah, and my family call me Jeremiah, and my close friends. And so because he works with one of my best friends who I run a business with, he knew me as Jeremiah, so it's kind of interesting. I answer to both, but yeah. So Jeremiah is like the name that I say without thinking. Yeah. And it was interesting because Jeremy never felt like it belonged to me. I really didn't like the name Jeremy when I was growing up. I was like, such an odd name it seems like a really nice name for a nice little boy. And I wasn't a nice boy. Like, I was like, it didn't belong to me, And then I guess when you reclaim the name, like, and as you would have heard, but like, I reclaimed so much. Then I read, and I'm not religious in any kind of manner. I'm a big believer in spirituality, and I've read, I'm in the process of reading the translated Orthodox Bible at the moment. Yeah. I've read translation versions of the Quran, the New Testament, but I was really intrigued by the chapter of Jeremiah and what that actually meant and what relationship to that chapter in particular my life had. Yeah. So, really, it was amazing stuff. Like, I love to learn, right? Like, so I have an unbiased relationship to knowledge, right? So if you look into astrology and you start looking at your lineage based on but then you're looking at it as a wrong date, it's a totally different story.
So you're 2 days
Yeah.
out, like that's moving.
Yeah, it's a totally different story. And so, when you start looking at those sort of things, you start realizing there are these patterns that have existed, even unconsciously, without us having any control in it, that it does play a part. Life is a crazy roller coaster.
It is. It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
I'm going to circle back and go, Jeremiah, welcome to Transforming the Game.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited about this. And I'm just going to say, not that anyone can see it, but we have a beautiful view here of the beach on the Gold Coast, and the sun is shining, and the ocean is blue, and just wonderful.
It really is spectacular.
We are very fortunate. So you are a proud, and you're going to have to tell me, Yalanji and Gumbaynggirr.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's go again.
Google.
Yeah, so like the K is often pronounced with a G.
Okay, good.
So we say Google.
Google.
And Google means the language we speak. And then Yalanji.
Yalanji.
Yeah, so Google Yalanji.
Okay. Google Yalanji.
Perfect. Means the language we speak. And Yalanji means in this country. So it's talking about like that's how. And then Gumbaynggirr. So Google Yalanji country is my grandfather's country. And that starts around Port Douglas in North Queensland and then stretches as far north as Cooktown and then west out to Laura or out to a place called Chillago. And so that is the traditional country of my grandfather. We're Western Yalanji people, so we're actually Google Nyugal people. And Nyugal was the clan, it was a clan of the Google Yalanji people. And then Gumbaynggirr was the mid-north coast of New South Wales. My grandmother was born at Barraville, which is west of Coffs Harbour. But she was removed from family forcibly as part of the stolen generation, and she was raised at Parramatta Girls' Home. So my cultural teachings have all come from my grandfather and my grandfather's brothers. And so I always identify myself as a Kuku Yalanji man first because my knowledge of Gumbaynggirr culture is limited. As much as I want to spend more and more time learning more and more history about that, the knowledge and teachings that I have and I carry with me and I share came from my grandfather and my grandfather's brothers.
Were born up north?
Born up north at Mossman and then raised predominantly in Sydney my whole life. Completely separate from culture, with a whole different identity. And so it first 5 years, well, I don't have any knowledge. No memory, which is fine, it's normal. But we also know the tragedy of the bandwidth of a child, under trauma and traumatic circumstances, has this mechanism to protect themselves by having no memory. So, tragic, like 26 foster families before you're 5 years old. And so a heartbreaking, like trail of terror, that sits with that. And, at 6, 7, I redefined my identity as a Maori person, because, I was being raised with Polynesian community. And so the Polynesian, like the Maori, the Samoan, the Tongan, like that culture and community then went on to raise me through rugby, through life, through how I was being, growing up. And I really defined my identity as that, and then it wasn't until I was 13 that I then hit a rocky road and then discovered that, in fact, that's not who I am. That in fact, that I have an Aboriginal father, not a Polynesian father. And so, yet again.
So it was only 13 you realised that wasn't your biological father?
Yeah. Well, not my biological, but I was told that you're from a Maori background, so it just, that's who I was. That's how I knew myself, and it's how I presented myself to the world, as well. Is that, I was performing in like kapahaka, and learning about like tangata whenua and all this, Maori concepts and constructs of culture. Like even the word, there's a very beautiful word in the Maori language, which is whangaid. And whangaid is the word for adoption. But it's a word that gives you place within a family structure. Whereas the word adoption is such an abrupt and an ugly word. Like it actually means you don't belong to them, but they're looking after you anyway. Whereas whangaid means you're family. Like you sit in this structure as family and no one's to ask any different. And so it wasn't until I was 13 at Bajura Children's Court, actually, that I started discovering and unraveling all of this, I guess, carnage that would impact the next 7 years of my life.
You're doing so much good in the community as a whole. Like you've got accolades and a list, and I've written pages of notes. What was your turning point?
The bush and the country, like that's, and this incredible concept, that we as First Nations people, we talk about country, and it's quite topical, at the moment, because people say, like recently we've heard it in the news, like, why do I have to be welcome to country? Like I'm from Australia, but our concept of country and Australia's concept of the continent as country is completely different. As a Kuku Yalanji man, that's my country. Like that's where I come from. And so when we talk about country, we're talking about where we belong to, where we come from. Yeah, everything, and country is a home, like, so why I always explain to people like a welcome to country is like a doorbell, because if you're walking up your street and you need to contact the next door neighbor or whoever, you don't just walk in their front door. Like you ring the doorbell and then you introduce yourself, and then they will say, oh, come through. Do you want a glass of water? You know, and they'll tell you a little bit about the neighborhood if you're new in the area. Or that's welcome to country. Like that's what it was. Is that traditionally this is an ancient concept that we have for a long time. You know, if you look at Kuku Yalanji people, we have to the north of us, we have Kuku people, the northern people. To the south, we have Irukandji people. And welcome to country had always been exercised amongst us. You know, Kuku Taipan out to the west, you know, because there were always times where they would have to cross across boundaries. And at that time, often, you know, people would make their way to the border, and the borders were often distinctly marked by mountains or rivers. And so they would often camp there and make a fire. So then the people of that country, of that clan, would see it. They would come and investigate. They would sit down. They would say, oh, look, at the moment, might have a funeral going on. There's something going on, ceremony, or actually you can't go over there. And then give them safe passage to walk across country. And that's what is missing. This concept, this conversation is the piece that's missing the most in our society because it's so misunderstood. You know,
it sounds, I that's even a bit of a learning for me, but it sounds like the basics of mutual respect.
Mutual respect. So when you say what country changed me, you know, that at 19 years old, or almost 19, I was released from Silverwater Center, adult prison, and I left and went straight back to Northern Queensland to be with my grandparents. And at that point changed my life because I knew how to navigate the darkness of Sydney. And when I talk about darkness, I'm not just talking about the night, like I'm talking about the sinister side of Sydney. And I knew that place. I was safe in that place. I knew how to exist. I'd survived in that place. And then all of a sudden I leave Sydney and the city and I'm put into a world that is so foreign because, you know, there are no traffic lights. There are no street lights. There is a generator that makes electricity. There is, like, if you want fresh fish, you go catch it. There was limited amount of money. So I went from a world where illegally there was an abundance of whatever you wanted to then understanding the constructs of poverty. And in it, while I was living in it, I would have never identified it as poverty because it was so rich. Like the happiness, the joy, the sharing, the love existed more in poverty than it did in wealth. And that was a really big eye-opener for me because when I look at the shanty that we were living in, like this little corrugated tin shed with a dirt floor, a rusty old wireframe bed, campfire that was cooked in, it was so beautiful.
When you got there, like you say how different it was, but safe.
I was terrified. I was so scared at first. When I first, like every sound, like I was a city kid. I was like,
okay, so it took a while
I was
to
like,
go.
fuck, what's that? Like, you'd hear a rustling in the bush. I was terrified. I wasn't with anyone my own age. They were all old people, which was beautiful because, and when I say, and old people, it's such a sign of reverence. You know, it's funny in our Western society, if you say, oh, you look old, people get really offended.
Yeah.
You know, like they're like, what the like back that up. You can't
you can't say that.
You know, but you know, we call our grandparents like, hey, old man, like, or that's a sign of reverence, of wisdom, of knowledge, of lived life. And so it's you know, even if I pull up at the petrol station and an old man said that I don't know, I'll say, hello, old man. Like, and so I'm recognizing him and his seniority.
Yes.
And it's such a really beautiful concept because people are so attached to age down here in the Western world. But yeah, country healed me because I was terrified. You couldn't do anything wrong. One, there's two. You could not do anything wrong living in the bush except something wrong would get you really hurt. You know, like, so if you pick up a snake that is venomous, it will bite you and you will possibly die because we're a long way away. Or if you walk behind that horse, it will kick you. You know, or if you ride the horse too fast, you will fall. Like, so every action had a consequence. And I don't really think that consequences existed like that in the city. Your actions in the city for me were, oh, you might go to jail. But jail narrative was normal. It was so normalized. But the thought of getting kicked by a horse terrified me, you know, like, and so I laugh about this, but it's a tragic laugh that until moving to Cape York with my grandparents, I'd never seen I'd never pet a horse. I'd seen police horses maybe, you know, like, but I'd never pet a horse. The closest thing to a horse was probably a stolen Mustang. And the reality was that horses became my life. At Crocodile Station, I built a relationship with a horse called Smokey, you know, which was, and it taught me trust, it taught me to love, it taught me to touch, it taught me to feel. It taught me when my emotions were off, its emotions were off. So it taught me the intuitiveness that the horse sensed it, like to the point where as I was going through this incredible healing journey for 2.5 years, the relationship I had with the horses was it taught me to love and trust because they were unconditional. Like the animals.
Animals are phenomenal. Animal therapy there.
Oh, and so I've come to learn about equine therapy and all of those sort of things, but unaware, that's what was going on. Putting your hand on a horse and watching its whole skin shiver. And like you realize, wow, this connection that I remember and the nostalgic memories that I have, even just talking about it, watching the way their ears prick up, watching the way they exhale. But like all of these things, I now appreciate so much more, maybe as I'm 46. And I really believe now in reflection that men, we probably don't really start truly understanding our emotional intelligence until 40, maybe.
Yeah.
And then, like there are, yeah. So I think at 46, I'm becoming far more emotionally intelligent and emotionally articulate as a result of things. And so what that's allowing me to do is reflect a lot on the things that impacted me the most in the most critical times of my life.
And you appear to be doing really well in ability with that, in paying it forward, and a lot of cultural stuff, keynote speaking. You're a phenomenal artist. And I feel like a lot of that might come out in your artistry. When did you realize, just let's go on the art trail, when did you realize that you could paint and draw? And
I guess art was it was one of the things that got me in the most trouble, because
right.
I looked at the city streets of Sydney and went, oh, they're ugly. And I was like, oh, I could go and there was in Redfern, there was a old cobbler. And the cobblers back then had tucks and shoe paint. And so they were in a spray can and they had the most beautiful colors. And there was an old bloke, I'm fairly certain, like he was an old Italian man. And so he used to give me a spray can every time I dropped off a pair of shoes to a client. So from every spray can, I could then go and paint a painting. And so we had this beautiful relationship. Sometimes it would be 3-4 cans, and 3-4 drops of shoes, and I'd get 6 cans of paint. And all of a sudden that was enough for a mural. And then I'd paint a train, and then I'd go back. And, so painting art for me has always been part of my life. It's just I was a vandal. I was a graffiti artist. And it was not appreciated. It's really nice now at 46, I can be an artist. And I can be an artist with spray cans.
Yeah.
And it's accepted, acknowledged, it's appreciated, and it makes a really good living.
And it's phenomenal. I was watching one you did in Palm Island.
Yeah.
That was just beautiful. And then you've also had your artwork gone global and on things like Nescafe, David Jones.
Yeah, it's been an incredible privilege. Palm Island, firstly, to talk about, is one of the most powerful projects I've ever been involved in because Palm Island has a direct relationship to my family. So the viewers and listeners, Palm Island's history is steeped in sadness and pain here in Queensland. Palm Island essentially was like a prison. It was like Queensland's version of Rottnest Island, which they have in WA, but whereby Aboriginal people from 40 different tribes around Queensland were forcibly removed and put on this island, and they were managed under the Aboriginal Act that was in operation from the 1930s. It's a history that is full of pain and sadness, but also so much joy that is on that island. And I have direct blood connections to that place. So to be able to be brought in by the local Aboriginal Council to create the artworks and has been an incredible privilege because we're able to bring the stories to life. But these are stories that I know because for the last 25 years, I've been telling these stories. Then you have the canvas artwork, but I was probably at the forefront of what we see today, whereby there are so many Aboriginal artworks being used on pillowcases, covers.
And beautiful too. I love.
Absolutely. So when Nestle contracted me to do that piece of artwork, I've been incredibly privileged, like to walk in the supermarkets and see coffee tins lining the shelves with my artwork, and seeing the elation of my kids, when they recognize the artwork as my own. And then it has continued on. Suncorp Bank have used all my artwork. David Jones have used all my artwork. Even I was walking Darwin last week, and I walked past a building, and my partner was like, "Isn't that your artwork?" And so a business that I couldn't even remember working with, it was using my artwork, which again, it probably it compromises the licensing agreement. They're going to get an email, very soon, but the reality was, like, it's a beautiful celebration of being able to share this art around the world, and people buy my art. That's an incredible privilege, and they put it in their house and they love it. And I will never tire of that buzz, that people want your artwork in their house.
I don't know. There's something about when you see some Aboriginal art that you, for me, I'm like, that feels home.
One of the most beautiful conversations I ever had with my grandfather was just right before he passed away. And I said to him, I was like, "Old man, like, Nawa Yalanji, like, what's my obligation to you as a Yalanji?" And my grandfather held my hand, and in a very tough translation, he was telling me, "Promise me you take any man or woman and walk them through our country, walk them through our art, walk them through our language, walk them through our story. Let them feel what we." Our Kuku Yalanji and Gumbaynggirr is like let them feel this. That conversation alone had the biggest impact on me. It inspired the compassion of learning. If we just keep teaching, Australia will learn. And that's, one of the things is that, look, Australia, I've seen the whole world. I'm incredibly privileged to see the whole world. There is not a country I'd rather call home. It's not without, political issues or problems, but there is no country in the world that doesn't have that. We're not perfect. I don't like the narrative Australia is a racist country. I don't like it. It makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable, because I don't believe so. I believe that there is a lot of ignorance in this country as a result of lack of education and lack of information being available, and also the hiding of information. That the powers to be didn't allow truth to be told. So therefore, people just weren't afforded the truth. And that's my obligation, is to share culture in a story that I never want the person sitting with me to feel guilty or ashamed, because be empowered by it. Like, the reality is, it is tragic, our history. It is painful. But if we keep sweeping the pain underneath the carpet, the rug of this lucky country, then the pain festers and it keeps bubbling. But if we actually sit and talk about the pain together and go, this is yours as much as it is mine, we get to build a really beautiful relationship on the back of pain. And that's, I look at my life a little bit, is that the foundations of my life, early life, were painful. But if I defined my life by the pain, it would have destroyed me, and it would have destroyed everyone around me. But if you let yourself be inspired by it, and you change and you create a life based on that trajectory, like, anything's possible.
And from that, I read where your grandfather asked you, what do you want to be?
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful.
What do you want to be? You want to be another Aboriginal kid in jail, and that's all you'll ever be. And it was a really hard-hitting statement, because at that point, I thought it was incredibly arrogant. I was like, what do you mean? You can't just change. I can't just change. I can't up and leave here. Like, I thought it was really arrogant. I was like, who are you to tell me? Like, but then this concept was, I guess, shared with me that we have the ability to dream, and dreams are free. And that was like the light bulb moment, because I thought dreams were for the wealthy. I thought they were for the rich. I thought they were for the privileged. I didn't realize that you could dream. And then if you applied the right tools to a dream, or this is how I like to talk it, I call it seeds of dreams. Right? And if you've got a handful of dreams and you throw them out the car as you're driving, they'll never grow. Or maybe you'll get lucky. One will sprout. But if you actually have your seeds, and then you turn your soil, and then you plant those seeds carefully, or you germinate the seed, or you let it, in cotton wool on your windowsill, and then you plant the seed. And I mean, you would appreciate it. I mean, the Greek history, like growing plants and like gardeners, like I know, like the relationship between the Greek migrants that came to Australia, and especially in northern Queensland, a lot of them were tobacco farmers. And the Greek were also quite dark-skinned. And so therefore, a lot of Aboriginal people worked and were protected by the Greek migrants that came into this. So the Greek and Italian migrants have got a beautiful history within our stories. And even like the Greek Orthodox, they were very giving and nurturing of some of the Aboriginal kids that were living out in, sort of stations or on these plantations. So, this garden of dreams. And then you water it with love, belief, discipline, right attitude. So all the right ingredients, your garden will grow. And sometimes you get to a point where that garden, the dream is not quite what I thought it was going to be. So then you take a clipping of that dream, which is infused with all your DNA, and you plant it next to it. And now this one will, So it really is one of those things that, the attitude of dreams came from that conversation with my grandfather.
How about dreaming big enough that one of the biggest events Australia's?
Yeah, look, I think it was a crazy concept, right? That I will never play didgeridoo on a bigger stage than the Sydney Olympics. And that was literally my first ever job almost. Like I left Cape York in 2000, in, North Queensland in 2000 and joined Bangarra Aboriginal Dance. And that was March, April, May. In June, I got my first ABN number and I traveled with Daryl Summers, from Hey Hey It's Saturday. So I traveled with Daryl Summers, because the Northern Territory had a campaign for tourism back then called You Never Never Know If You Never Never Go. And I got the contract playing didgeridoo as the entertainment on that Territory roadshow promoting the Northern Territory as a destination. And then in September, we had the Sydney Olympics and myself and one other didgeridoo player, we were privileged enough to be the didgeridoo players who opened up the Sydney Olympics. The night that Kathy Freeman won, which is 3.5 weeks later, I was playing didgeridoo in this corporate suite for the Australian ambassador to Switzerland. And it was the first time I had an honest conversation with a stranger about my life, because the ambassador said to me, Jeremy, would you ever come across to Switzerland? And I had to be honest for the first time at that point and said, I would love to, but I don't think I'm allowed. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I've been told that of my criminal history, I'm not allowed a passport. 11 juvenile sentences, 2 adult sentences. But it was my life. And before that, this happened. He was like, oh, this is quite a horrific story. What if I could help you? In December, I got sent forms that would give me an invite to the United Nations, Geneva. And in February of 2001, I flew out on a diplomatic invitation to Geneva to tell my story about, I guess, the abuse we were subjected to in care facilities. Spoke about the abuse we were subjected to in incarcerated. And then I spoke about my grandparents and the life that they were giving me, Sydney Olympic. And it was the first time I ever spoke publicly. So
Don't do it in halves. It's like your first thing
Yeah.
do the Sydney Olympics. Your first
Public
keynote
speaking,
is at the United Nations.
Yeah,
so
so-
you're like, go hard or go home, Miss Jeremiah.
Exactly right. So it just, all of a sudden, life was that, and for the next 10 years between 2011, I traveled the world playing didgeridoo for all the Australian embassies around the world. So Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Buckingham Palaces, London Philharmonic Orchestra, German Philharmonic Orchestra, the Edinburgh Tattoo, just phenomenal life, but in 2011, it all started to change a little bit, because what I realized was I had this great life, but there was so much untold history here in Australia, and there was so much poverty. And that was the part that affected me, was people in Australia don't like to say the word poverty, because we're a rich country, we're a lucky country. And so it makes us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
So-
we're ignoring it, or we're not doing
So we say things like low socioeconomic, or, it's, and because that makes us feel a bit safer. But the reality is poverty. Like here on the Gold Coast, amongst the glitz and glamour, poverty exists 40 minutes up the road. And if you turn off your highway into Inala, into Woodridge, parts of Logan, like, poverty exists. And people call it the ghettos and all these sort of, but inside there is poverty as a result of policies of the past, or, the displacement of migrant people, refugees, and, all these different things. Poverty exists. And I went, how do I do it? Well, I'm going to take this voice and this education of the world that I've been given, because I have sat next to, whether it be or in airplanes, in business class lounges, at dinners, some of the greatest minds of and I've picked their brain. Like a crow, I have picked everything. And for me, learning didn't come through reading. Reading was difficult, but listening was my superpower. And listening and then remembering repetitive learning, you know. So I would always stop people. I was like, what's that word? What does that mean? And then I would memorize that word, and then I would learn that word, learn the meaning of that word. Then I would just apply that word to language. And people have often said, hey, where did you become so articulate? And it became, the world made me articulate. Absolutely. When I met Sir David Attenborough, I met him at Buckingham Palace. There was, an event that was hosted. Like, I was shocked he was so tall. Like, he was tall. He's tall. Two, I was like, had such a man crush on David. So, David Attenborough taught me that you could tell a story and you didn't actually have to be interested in the topic, but you become fascinated in the narration. And so the thing with culture is, even if you're not that interested in it, if I can narrate it, you'll fall in love with the words that I share, and that will impact you. And, many times I've had that experience where people not interested necessarily in learning culture, in fact, they think they know a lot, listen to the way I articulate it, and that changes their perception. And so I guess, public speaking was not something I ever trained for, never had a desire to. I was thrown on the stage and my mouth opened and I could speak.
Do you think that comes from just generation
Storytelling,
right?
Yep. %. It's the only thing I can attribute to, because, my mum is she's the most beautiful, tiny little lady, my mum, and I guess in a way, I look at that even is that, my mum and all my sisters are all carers. And so my mum is a registered nurse. My elder sister is a nurse practitioner. One of my sisters studied midwifery and is a qualified registered nurse, and the other one now is completing her course. And so they're all nurses. And so even in that part of things, like that genetic makeup, is that I think that I come from an ancestry of storytellers and a lineage of carers. And that is really what I am today. I'm a storyteller. And in a sense, like my grandfather taught me about traditional healing and medicine and all these different things. And so I naturally was drawn to how I help someone. So, public speaking is, I'm sharing my story, the intimate details of pain, the hardship, the the breaks, the ups and downs, the mental health, the challenges with addiction. I'm taking people on this, making them feel safe to say it's okay to heal. I said, healing doesn't mean the scars don't exist anymore. It just means the scars no longer control us. And that is a really important thing, that we do throughout our life experience trauma in various degrees, irrespective of what it might be. So in 2017, I was contracted by the federal government as a consultant to do the Royal Commission up in Darwin with kids that were abused in Dondale Correction Centre. And I did, for 8 months, every face-to-face conversation with kids, and it re-traumatized myself really badly in a way that I could never have anticipated or expect. I didn't expect that. I thought I was good, and the cracks in my armor came down really quickly. And at the end of that consultation, the bureaucrats went back to their business, back in their business down in Canberra, and I was destroyed. And the nightmares that went on to haunt me, I then treated them with addiction. So I then developed a pretty gnarly cocaine addiction. I had, and that was at a time that everything was going wrong anyway. Like, things were like just not working out in my life. I had become unhappy. And I was, at that point I was married. I was unhappy in my marriage. I was a dad with all this pain. I wasn't happy about how I was being a father. I wasn't happy with who I was. I wasn't happy with the story I'd told. And so what I realized was my happiness was gone. And I tried to, what I call the Robin Williams syndrome, whereby I was the life of the party, but I was dying inside. And so people would walk in and I would have my hands in my head in my hands, and people would walk in and I'd turn around like, oh my God, and all of a sudden it was showtime. It was just, my life was entertainment. And then they would go and I would have to deal with this pain of who I was. I became like not someone that I'm proud of, because no one really knew the depths of my addiction. I was hiding it from. I realized if you're sniffing so much cocaine that you have powder around your nose, everyone knows that people are going to, so then you start injecting it, because I keep turning up for work. I keep turning up. I keep standing on stage. It was ridiculous. I was flying around the country with cocaine in my pocket every day. I was a horrific addict. There wasn't a place in a city where I didn't know the number of someone that would drop the cocaine to me at the airport. So it was a horrific drug addiction that was masking all of my pain. You know, it wasn't until until everything crashed and burned, you know, like I finally got out of the marriage that I was in, you know, which I was terrified because I was like, fuck, like these are my kids. Like, how do I leave the kids? I was really heartbroken about that, you know, but I was heartbroken about staying in a marriage with a woman that I wasn't in love with. And then, you know, like then I had to put the pieces of the puzzle back together. So, and the addiction went, you know, through 2016, 17, 18 and into 19. And I just finally started getting a hold of everything in 20. And I was like, right, back to face the world.
How did you start getting yourself out of it? Like,
I ran out of money.
so it wasn't realization.
I ran out of money. I simply ran out of money. And in fact, I was sitting, this is the biggest, actually, you're right. There's 2 points. I ran out of money, but there was a circumstance that went on is I found myself sitting in Parramatta Children's Court with my second son, who had been arrested for trespass, but also tragically, the police had found a sawn-off shotgun, and it was a sliding door moment where, I think that's the right terminology, but the moment that everything I'd ever done, I'd ultimately created. Here I am sitting Parramatta Children's Court 20 years after I last sat, looking at my son who was born pretty much on the same birthday. You know, you think about the stories and growing up to be just like me. I've let him down.
Yeah, is that the life you want?
I've let him down, and it broke my heart. Like I remember the tears that fell. And, you know, fortunately for me, I had some money left in my bank account. I wasn't relying on legal aid. I paid a lawyer, which was never afforded to me. And fortunately, my son was given a good behavior bond. He was never incarcerated. He was acquitted of the offenses. And it was this moment of, I need to fix my life and I don't have any money left. Spent every last cent on that lawyer fee for my son. I got offered a job over in the Kimberleys in Kununurra in Western Australia. I was like, great. Nobody knows me here. I was no one. Just turned up for work. And when I wasn't working, I went fishing. I went back to country. It wasn't long before I fell in love over there. You know, like, so, you know, I fell in love with the country, but then I met a beautiful woman. And, you know, and it was this really incredibly like interesting relationship because it just really was me taking care of her for a long, like it wasn't like any relationship I'd experienced before. It was very different. It really was taking care of someone, looking after someone and loving someone and just spending time with someone. I found this really beautiful video yesterday, just mind-numbingly scrolling as we
we all get stuck in that vortex.
And I guess the algorithms, they drive what we need. No, but it says the person you truly love, you love twice. You know, so at first you fall in love with the looks. It's then
that flurry of the love.
And then if you go through all the hardship and the pain, you then fall in love again with all of the person's imperfect. You know, it's, you know, I hope that comes true. You know, like the reality is,
I love that.
And you know, like we're constantly learning, right? Like we're learning how to be the best parent. Being a parent's hard. Like I raise all four of my kids at the moment to myself alone, and it's hard. You know, like teenage girls are hard. I have my daughter who's 17, who is doing incredibly well. You know, she was involved in for the second time Australian Fashion Week as a model. Like she's incredibly beautiful. Then I have my 13-year-old daughter who knows the answers to everything in the world and is incredibly inquisitive, like she's an amazing young girl, you know, and then my 22-year-old son who lives with his partner, he's a fiance, you know, but essentially I'm still raising them all. And it's hard work. I love my daughters with all of my heart. Like I spoil my girls. Like the way a daughter hugs you is very different to the way your son hugs. And I'm sure women experience that with their sons.
Yeah, the boys.
So yeah, it's tough, you know. So hopefully, you know, this second abbreviation of love, you know, we get it right. You know, like we've been, you know, spending time together in Darwin, you know, because it's sort of halfway between the coast. You know, she can go from Kununurra to Darwin. I can go from Brisbane to Darwin, and it's so, you know, so that's you know, so there is a phase. with the wonderful thing about being an entrepreneur and a business owner is you can dictate the terms of where you live and operate. So even if all my business is in Queensland, I don't have to live in Queensland. I can mobilize. I can get to wherever I need to go to. There's a plane to everywhere. You don't even really have to tell your clients where you live because you're just going to catch a plane there anyway. So it doesn't matter. Even if I was going to Brisbane for 2 nights of work, I would book my 2 nights of hotel accommodation anyway. So if I lose maybe a couple of $100 profit on a business because I have to pay my tickets or flight, but most businesses these days, as a consultant, they'll cover your airfare, they'll cover your, as an artist, all of my expenses, I cost it back to the client anyways.
With your entrepreneur, because you've set up a pretty good life there, and you do a lot of cultural consulting, which in the big corporations, they are bringing in KPIs and targets on welcome to country. There's a certain, like there's all these stats. I did want to ask you about, and if you even knew about, in a lot of the bigger corporations where they have a stat to have
procurement. So
procurement, right?
I can, it's one of the things that I can hand on my heart, stand proudly by the creation of the procurement policies.
Yeah.
Myself, Marcia Langton, who is probably not as well known, but is probably Australia's greatest Indigenous academic. I don't know that she would like me saying that. She's incredibly humble, but is probably she's the most phenomenal lady who was at the forefront of the protests in the 70s and the 60s, and now is one of our greatest academics based out of Melbourne. She's a phenomenally beautiful lady that comes with so much knowledge. But Auntie Marcia and myself were both contracted to Andrew Forrest, Twiggy.
Oh, yeah.
Our richest Australian. So he was, when the Abbott-led government was elected, he committed to what is called the Forrest Review. And that was Andrew Forrest doing a review on welfare and the reforms around welfare. And because Andrew Forrest is Andrew Forrest, he was like, well, I'm not going to do welfare. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to do a reform on every. And he created the Forrest Review, which went on to have 27 recommendations around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But again, was a great example of the government investing into a white man to tell people how Aboriginal people should change their lives. But I was an advisor on that in that process. It's also when I resigned from working for Andrew. But the procurement policy came from that. And it was based on Fortescue's FMGs. At that point of time, they had spent $1 billion on Aboriginal contracts, on Aboriginal business. Fortescue, they were leading the way with Rio Tinto. But Fortescue's perception of an Aboriginal business was based on 25% ownership, and I don't believe that's right.
Yeah.
Now, Aboriginal business is recognised as 51% ownership, and that is what quantifies an Aboriginal business. The government committed to parity. So basically 3.6% of the total population of Australia is Aboriginal, and so 3.6% of the total spend of the government should go to Aboriginal businesses. And this was based around, the modeling and the recommendations came from the success of Aboriginal businesses in Canada, in Northern America, whereby it had really alleviated poverty because Aboriginal businesses employ Aboriginal people at a far greater rate than any other business. But people take advantage of it. And so one of the things that we've faced as Aboriginal businesses are fake business. These Aboriginal owned businesses that have an Aboriginal name attached to it, but they have nothing to do with it. And they're winning these big contracts. Things that make me really uncomfortable are like, PricewaterhouseCoopers has an Indigenous arm, but how?
And that's kind of, and that is the angle I was going to head down, is the scene, because I've been involved in big corporations with this policy. I thought it was brilliant. And then I came across someone who is like, I'm starting a business. I'm like, great. And he has Aboriginal.
Yep.
And I said, great. And he goes, so I can get the Indigenous contracts. And I'm like, hang on. I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, because I'm Indigenous. And I said, but is it in my head, ignorantly, was it went to Aboriginal community who was supporting Aboriginal communities. And then you had the whatever, like in my head it was bigger than an individual that happened to have a grandfather that was Aboriginal, because they could be really well off and living a really great life and be very wealthy, but because their grandfather was an Aboriginal, they're now getting these massive contracts, and like, because they have to. And I'm like, I feel like someone missed a boat here.
So it has to be, part of the issue comes down to greed, right? So I always talk about the transition of a race of people goes through survival, then goes to greed before you get to thriving. And I feel like in many cases we're at this part as a nation, especially as First Nations people. Greed is actually in place in some people are taking advantage of circumstances. I've seen so many fake businesses. I've seen so many businesses. As an Aboriginal man, I'm disgusted that another Aboriginal person would just put their name to it just for a kickback.
There's
When
always
the
a
procurement
loophole.
policy came out, my phone rang so hot. People were like, "Oh, do you want to do a JV with us?" And I'm like, "All right, I'm entrepreneurial."
Yeah. So you're like,
I'm like, "Yeah, sweet. So tell me about it." Well, you don't have to do anything. We just need your name. You'll be like on paper the 51%, and we'll just give you kickback. And I'm like, doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
If I'm 51%, I'm total control. I'm majority control. So a lot of people didn't want to do business with me because I'm an entrepreneur. I will take an opportunity. Like my artwork business, Native Arts, is myself and Maddie Tapia. Here's Melody. We have a 51% registered business, but we're both artists. I deliver the work. I chase the contract. I'm at the forefront of the payment. I'm managing those sort of things. Maddie is a far greater artist than me, but business is what I do. He's an artist. Most artists are not good at business, whereas I had this incredible apprenticeship under Andrew Forrest, one of the most ruthless business, whether you like it or not, and I don't like, but it taught me everything I know about business.
You've been around such amazing people, and you're a sponge, and you're smart enough to have been taking.
I've been so lucky, like most people in their life will never meet a billionaire, and this is not a flex. But I've been to Necker Island with Richard Branson.
That like
amazing, like Losing My Virginity, that book that he wrote, amazing book. Amazing philanthropist, incredibly compassionate, incredibly autistically artistic. I call it like that's where I sort of put myself sometimes. I'm autistically artistic, is that I see things and I can't actually get it out of my brain. And then there was Sir Frederick Barclay and Sir David Barclay, who owned the London Telegraph. They owned the Ritz-Carlton in London, like these guys, 26,000 employees. The Barclay Empire is a big empire. And then Andrew Forrest. And then, so in my life, I've worked alongside these 4 credible billionaires that made the money themselves. The Barclays built their empire like a real life monopoly story. They bought a milk bar. They then built a hotel. They owned all the milk bars. They then built a hotel. They then had they created that empire that way.
Amazing. You keep in contact with
yeah, the Barclay family, I certainly do. So David Barclay passed away tragically, but Sir Frederick is still alive. A great, friendship with his daughter and granddaughter who, has a disease called Williams syndrome. And that's how I came in contact with the Barclay family, but then went on to work with the entire family as a whole. It's incredibly privileged, but business is what I love. And then, as a transit, and then you start the sinister side, the drug dealing, you realize if you have the best product at the best price, you're going to make the most money. And so,
and demand.
Yeah. I talk to people about the fact that the streets taught me business, because not only that is the streets are very dangerous and they're very unforgiving, and it's easy to see bullshit on the street. And so walking into a boardroom is just as easy. Is that you start seeing people they're telling you about this great thing and they start twisting their rogers and playing with their wedding rings. And I'm like, I don't trust you now. Why aren't you telling me the truth? Because my hands are on the table. You can see my hand of cards. And, so I learned to navigate business with a lens from the city.
I find your curiosity,
resilience, right? Like that's, because to start a business, you have to be resilient.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about this joint venture thing, the Aboriginal, to finish it. Myself and a very good friend of mine have started a rendering business, and it is 51% majority owned Aboriginal. I knew nothing about rendering, but I've known him. I've watched him build the success of his business. And I said to him, what do you think about a joint venture business between yourself and me as looking at opportunities where there are contracts to be awarded, where they have to spend on Aboriginal spend, but I'm only doing this on the conditions that we employ kids that have come from prison, or we employ people that have been homeless. So we do it for profit, but with a social conscience. That's the reason why the procurement place was put in place. was because it was supposed to employ Aboriginal people at a 10 times greater rate than and so a story like what you were sharing, they're not employing any Aboriginal. They just, I see so many of these businesses not impacting the communities they're supposed to have come from.
And that's what my interpretation of that whole policy was, which it should be paying forward to the Aboriginal community.
We have to be the ones responsible for calling this out, because otherwise, as a white person, you're going to get called a racist, and that's not what you are. Like, you're like, oh, this doesn't look right. Are you, so if you ask that question,
you're just a hater because they're, and I'm
you're like,
I was just,
she's a racist.
Yeah.
No. She had the right to ask, all right, so tell me about your Aboriginal business. Like, how many Aboriginal employees have you got?
What's
where are you guys from? What impact have you made on community? I can tell you, like from us at Native Arts, the joint venture business, which was, one of the first joint venture businesses that I legitimately set up, is that we've done the majority of our work on Palm Island. We've sponsored the community rugby league carnivals. We've sponsored the junior rugby league carnivals. We've sponsored, so there's a lot of social impact that we have, and that's where the benefit should be. And I will keep calling out. I'm like, what are you really doing? Are you really an Aboriginal business? Because I don't see any impact you're making on our communities. And I certainly know that, that there's a couple, like there's an Aboriginal, cleaning maintenance company, Multhana, and Aboriginal, Joe Wallace is the partner of the 51%, but he's out there. He's employing Aboriginal people. He's doing the contract. He's winning the contracts, but delivering the work at the highest standard and giving Aboriginal people the opportunity to work. Shaping Australia Group, they're a civil engineering. They're winning the contracts and they're employing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They're having an impact on community. So there are, you've got John Kirby and there are phenomenal businesses. Adam Sirota and Bridgman's, Adam Sirota played for the Socceroos. He used the wealthy attained as a football player to acquire a business, Bridgman's. He now is winning contracts in the education space, but he's employing Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
He's providing an impact. Now, what we know is that good Aboriginal business will alleviate poverty, because we'll go into Logan's and Woodridges. I'll say with the kids, you want to learn how to spray paint? Come work with me. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, we're going to spray paint that whole highway. Look, are we allowed? I'm like, yeah, we're actually going to get paid for it. And not only that, no vandalism happens in the community, because now the kids that were doing the vandalism protect the pieces of artwork because they're part of it. So the social return is so much greater because there's social investment. Whooping them up the back of the head, clipping them, calling them, oh, you're nothing but a problem, nothing but a problem. If you get told you're a problem, you're going to be a problem. And that's the big thing. So, I love the procurement policy when it's done well, but I also
agree with it. It was just, I don't know.
The thing that irks you is the same thing that irks me.
Yeah, and that's good, because again, it's an ignorance of the understanding of even what it was about, because I had a preconceived conception of what I thought it should be, which turns out was right. So
yeah, I mean, I love the impact I can have as a result of building business. And there's several, because for me, I have my business, Jeremy Donovan, the public speaking side, the consultancy, which is all of me. I then have Native Arts, which is the mural based business, doing the public installations, and with myself and Maddie Tapaya. I then have a business which I've just started, which is called Feathers of Freedom, which is about men's healing. So it's going into Aboriginal communities, and it's around looking at domestic violence and how do we have an impact as men on the impacts of Aboriginal, of domestic violence in our communities, not just Aboriginal communities, but men need to be leading the conversations on this, that right now men are subjected to domestic violence, and I've seen horrific counts of it, but men are not losing their life directly as a result of physical impacts of men, like women do. Men tragically are taking their own lives with mental health as a result of, especially the family courts, like some of that, drives men to all sorts of crazy, spaces in their mind. But physically, men hurt women when they're violent. Emotionally, women hurt men when they're in those. So there's that. And then there's the Calkill group, which is the rendering, which has the, so. And then I have Centurions, which is the online platform, which is an online platform that I run with myself here. He's a Māori person based up here in the Gold Coast, and then Tops, who is based over in Dubai, was a Serbian refugee. And, we run an online men's program that we've just been building over time, which is, fantastic because I love helping men. I look around our society, and while I'm certainly not a perfect representation of, I don't even know what a man's should or shouldn't be really. I have a concept of it. Yes, I have good values, but I see so many lost. And I also see young men that are exploring masculinity in really toxic ways. I see young men that are willing to do self-work at a very early age today. So young men at 18, 19, 20 are talking about mindset, talking about, and I love that. So how do we lead them in a way that is really functioning and really positive? So they're not taken advantage of. So you don't just get subjected to really misogynistic views like Andrew Tate, and I'm not saying, there's some things that I really like that Andrew Tate has said, but I wouldn't watch it because there are other things that I simply cannot stand. And so therefore I can't pick and choose what I've decided that no, he is not for me because I don't believe in that. So I can't believe in any of it. And it was the same thing as a business person with Andrew Forrest. I'm sorry, I don't believe in your view on this. So I can't believe in any of it. And that's the reason why I resigned from Andrew, that he taught me everything I needed to know about business. You also showed me everything I wasn't as a man. And that was how I resigned.
That's very good self-awareness too, instead of like going into environment.
And I did. I drank the Kool-Aid for a while. And Andrew is amazingly charismatic. Andrew Forrest, and he sweeps you up in a, imagine me, at 28, you want to come on my private jet? I'm like, proud.
Yes.
Let's go. And before I knew it, I was flying on the Prime Minister's planes, because Andrew afforded me that opportunity,
Grateful for the opportunity.
But it's for a little while I sat and drank from the Kool-Aid, and then I went, now I'm compromising my integrity, and I couldn't do that. The moment you compromise your integrity, you can't sleep at night, and that hurt. And that's where I had to go, well, enough's enough. But it, damaged me. The addiction, all of those sort of things, it's, I'm incredibly grateful for the life I live today, right now, because and I always say to my now partner, even though, we've gone through our challenges, you're still getting the best version of me that's ever been. I'm healthy, I'm sober, I'm training, I'm fit, I'm busy. And the busier I am, the better the world is. Because
you're paying it forward with your
I'm ambassador for the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation. And their catch on the front of the shirts we wear is literacy is freedom.
Oh, really?
Because, which is amazing because literacy, as someone that struggles with dyslexia and reading and writing writing was easy because I was great memory, right? So if you've got a good memory, you can spell. And so I was always phenomenal at spelling because I've got a good memory. And then the other, so writing, I was an artist, right? So I'm very, my handwriting it's like calligraphy. It looks like an artwork. And, but reading is difficult. So I love that charity is of all the charities that I'm involved in, the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation is phenomenal because it puts a book in a kid's hand. And that's something that I've watched the joy of my kids. And I could never do it, but I could live the joy through them reading. I've been really busy this week. It's NAIDOC week. I've had quite a lot of keynotes, and I spoke about the crash and the burn and the fall of Jeremy Donovan, this, that went from NITV to, on the Kuruma to all of a sudden, where is he? And now he started to appear again. I spoke about it for the fact that the beauty of knowledge, you never lose it. And so even when you lose everything financially, don't lose your knowledge. So people someone said to me, was it hard to bounce back? But no, because I always had the knowledge about what was, and that's what I'll never lose. And then there's drive. As long as you've got knowledge and drive.
So what is your rocking chair, Jeremiah, with a smile on your face going?
It's still, I've had this dream for a long time. I think probably since my first son was born in 2002. My dream is that one day I will have grandkids, probably getting closer. So it might not be in my first grandchild's life, but maybe in one of them, that my grandkids will jump up on my lap and I will tell them about the disparity or the poverty or the inequality or the racism that I experienced in my life. And they will look at me in disbelief because they will, that's what drives me. That's what I hope they experience, and so I know it's a glass half full like attitude. The other part is when I think about legacy, so I talk about this a lot, there will come a time where I'm dead, where I die. And I don't know when that is. I hope that, and I know and I've said I want to be cremated, but there'll be a time where I have a funeral and I want the room to be full of people who can say my kids impacted their life in some way or not. I helped them, I impacted, inspired them. That's it. But that's what my legacy I want it to be, is at some point we connected. I had an life. That's what I want, the room to be full of people like that. And that's what drives me, have an impact on another person's life. And, I had the conversation this morning in the car park at the gym. I pulled up and there was a guy that was clearly homeless living in his car. Dog. I got out, took my time, and I reflected on the really hard times I've had in life of homelessness, poverty, addiction. I was like, how long have you been living in your car today? He was so shocked. Like, oh, it's October. And he's like, are you okay? Like, he was worried that I was upset that he was in the car park of the gym. And I was like, no, brother, like, I know what that feels like. He's like, I thought you were going to tell me to move. Or like, he's like, I'm not making any, like, he was so apologetic without needing to be apologetic. I was like, brother, have you eaten? I was like, have you eaten today? He's like, no, but I got some snacks for my dog, and I was like, here, I only have $30. I was like, I've got $30. And he wouldn't accept. I was like, no. I'm going to put it on your windscreen. I don't care what you do with it. Because this is one of the things that really shits me sometimes. Is like, I see people being generous, like with the homeless community. They're like, I'll give you this, but don't buy drugs or alcohol. No. If they need to buy drugs or alcohol, they need to buy drugs. Don't tell them what they can, don't give them that and tell them what they can do with it. Hopefully the gesture, they buy the food. But the reality, I've seen so many homeless, and you see it like these social projects online where, someone gives up, buys a pizza and then they share it with all the other homeless. They're so generous. People with nothing share the most. And, but, like I gave this guy $30, told him, you know what, brother, I hope it gets easier. I'm not going to promise you it will. I hope it will. I hope it does. I said it did for me. I remember my son's 18th birthday. I gave him a car for his birthday, but I didn't have enough money for him to have an 18th birthday. So we pawned his car at a pawn shop to get enough money to put a birthday party on. And I knew that I'd be able to make the money back, to buy it back. Like I know what it's like to have nothing and to lose everything and then to be able to make it back again. And you know what? I was halfway through my gym session and this guy came into the gym and he would have had to convince the staff at the gym that he was looking for me. And I spoke to the lady at the front desk. What do you say? No, I need to give this to someone that I met in the car park. So he had, look, I don't even know where he got it from, but he had like a really nice like drink bottle that had never been used. And he brought it in and he's like, I don't have much anything to give you in return. You didn't have a water. He's like, I noticed you didn't have a water bottle going into the gym. And I was like, but I didn't give you a gift to get a gift. And I was like, just remember this, like you will get more love from a perfect stranger you've known than someone you've your whole life. They want you to succeed, but not as much as. But a perfect stranger will often want you to. I had nothing. I just really hope that one day he's out of his car and has a home.
You're doing it. You're living the life, Jeremiah, where you are paying it. I see it. I see it online. Just talking to you, and your passion, culture, and
that's it. Yeah, I love people.
I love people too.
Yeah,
and I can just feel that with you, where you're just like, I just want you to be happy, you to be and do the right thing, and then everything works.
Oh, this is a brand new tattoo. So this is my artwork.
Go this way.
Or it's the beginning of a dot painting on my arts. It's the whole story is my whole dreaming story. So there's an owl that is carrying a didgeridoo. There is, this is on my 40th birthday, I had a clock tattooed on my hand with the word Mavita, which is my life, because, I'm only going to give time to people that value my time. And then you have the crocodile, the saltwater crocodile. And then up here you have a red-tailed cockatoo. And then up here you have like a boomerang. So it's a big story of my life about all the things that are important. And then I've just started filling all the spare skin will be filled in with dots, which is one of my artworks. And the lady is tracing my artwork on my hand. So it was painstaking, these dots. Yeah.
That's dedication. That's dedication. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so open and honest.